So with that being said, I think we have Yves on camera already. Yves, nice to see you again, and I'll pass the mic to you.
So everyone knows this. It's change. The world of talent attraction is changing, and no matter what changes are happening, the fundamentals are always going to be where it starts. So we all know this. Everyone who's been in the industry for as long as a year or so, like it's been in the last year, it's been getting more difficult for HR professionals to find talent. There's a lot of things happening right now. The shift with international recruitment is one of the things that's going on. There's also AI tools that are creating spray and pray methodologies for job seekers to apply to jobs that creates, AI will one day be a very efficient tool for all of us, but it is going to be painful before it gets better. So a lot of those things are contributing to adding noise to what is already a very difficult role that you all have. And you all already have a lot on your plates. So not sharing anything here that you probably didn't know. So then what can you do about it? I did mention is the fundamentals, and it really starts with three things. So if you're an HR manager, a talent acquisition individual within your organization, if you run a small business and you're in charge of hiring, this is like the three questions that you start with, no matter what your role in the organization is understanding who your organization, who you are as an employer. So what makes you unique? What are the things, what are the values that you have that you need to be able to communicate? Know where you want to go. So understand where the organization is going, because that also has to be part of the conversation. So understanding the vision, the mission, and the values of your organization is critical before anything else that you communicate to the outside world. And last but not least, I would say is know who you want to bring with you. So understand who are the talent, who are the individuals that make up the team that you need to have to accomplish the goals that you want to. And that is usually an internal introspective. Before you actually go out and start recruiting, you need to understand who do you have today around the table, and what are the strengths and weaknesses, and what are the gaps that you're trying to fill. Not just put individuals in roles for specific skill sets. Figure out what the strengths and weaknesses of the organization are. So start with where you are. Evaluate your toolkit. What do you have today? Do you have a career site? Do you have branding? Do you have an employer value proposition? Figure out those things so you know what you're working with. You may not be able to create all those things. You might not even have the authority to build a career site or to change your career site. But by knowing what you're working with, you're also going to understand what influences the output that you're going to get on the other side. Have a look at your job posting. That's a basic 101. With all that information from the previous slides, see if your job postings are actually reflecting your company mission, vision, and values. Is it presenting a vision for the future of your business? And when people are reading your job postings, do they see themselves wanting to be part of this? Audit your application process. I'm going to say that out loud. Most application processes suck. Like, they are terrible. And a lot of decisions are being made on HRS and ATS systems for improving the internal efficiencies of an organization. But oftentimes what's left behind is what is the job seeker experience. And I can guarantee that you're losing at least 50% of applications through really terrible application processes. Again, you may not be able to change that. You may not have many of you are on long-term, 5-10 year contracts, and you just don't have any influence there. But again, understanding what may influence the results on each stages of your hiring efforts will help you understand why there may be efforts that aren't producing the results you're expecting. Something that a lot of people don't do is analyze your competition. Like, how are they positioning themselves? What can you do differently? How can you message what's compelling about your organization differently than they are? Because it is a competitive process and you are competing for the best talent. Find out how people are talking about your company. You've all seen Glassdoor. Indeed has those as well. A lot of those are difficult to sometimes combat because essentially something could have happened with an organization that someone was left really frustrated or annoyed and leaves you a bad review for something that you don't have control over. Hopefully, though, the positive impressions that people have about working at your organization outweighs the negative. And these are some of the things that job seekers will do today, is that we'll look to see what kind of reputation you have as an employer. One bonus thing I would say that I think would be shocking is if anyone's familiar with Reddit, Reddit, Reddit has a lot of information about the individuals that you may hire one day in your organization, or like the type of profiles that you may have. And it's really great to see unfiltered information. If you have a certain ATS or HRS system, go on Reddit and see what people who are trying to apply to it, what they're saying about it, because you might be shocked by some of the responses and some of the things that are being said, or you might have already done this and none of this is surprising to you. So try to understand what you have to work with today is the general message of before you start anything. And then when we're not, now we're at the stage where we're talking about finding your candidates or your audience. And so most organizations actually don't have an ideal candidate profile. You hear about ideal customer profiles all the time, but you rarely hear about, they both share the same acronym, ICP. But what is your ICP? What does your ideal candidate look like? Because many companies just hire, post jobs, but they don't truly know what they're looking for. So try to understand like what is the type of individual that you need for your organizations. There are some great tools. We can provide some resources as well on how to build an ideal candidate profile. It doesn't need to be overly extensive, but again, understand your existing skill sets and strengths and weaknesses of your current organization. Understand how someone can join your organization and have an impact and an influence that is beyond just the core skills that you're requiring for. So like what type of attitude do you need to have? Like what type of mindset? Or do you want someone who just comes in and basically, hey, I just need someone to do this, and I just need to be able have them be able to do shift work. Figure out what those things are, because that's what you need to also communicate to the outside world. I'm going a little fast here because we got a little bit of content to cover, but we'll provide this as a recording afterwards as well. Another thing that people don't do is talk to your existing employees to figure out where they hang out. Like if you're looking for a developer, or if you're looking for someone in marketing or any project manager, any type of role really, where did they go to get information? Do they hang out on Reddit? Do they hang out on different are they on like community groups that are talking on Facebook or on LinkedIn or on Slack groups, which is another thing that there are many out there that people don't realize. Where do they hang out? Because you don't need to really reinvent the wheel. You already have someone that has that profile in your organization. So just basically find out where they hang out, and then you'll be able to find more people in those same areas. And yeah, where did they look for jobs? Everyone's going to say Indeed. Totally get it. But that's not the only place that people who are actively looking for opportunities spend time looking. And many of the passive candidates out there, they aren't necessarily looking, but they might have had a bad day at the office, and all of a sudden they are a little bit more open to new opportunities. How do you, in terms of like, where do they spend most of their time? Are they on LinkedIn all the time? Then maybe there's some advertising that can be done. Are they on Facebook? Are they on X or Twitter or whatever are they on TikTok if it's still going to be around in the next 30 days or so? Figure out like where are they currently looking or paying attention or listening for what opportunities are out there. And I would say like understanding what motivates people, because it's different and it's changed. We can talk about Gen X, Gen Y, Gen Z, millennials, but it's changed. And if your messaging doesn't resonate with them, it doesn't matter how much time you spend and how much money you put. Like you're essentially going to put all of that on the front end to just basically not connect with the individual with whatever it is that is the main part of your call to action. This is a lot. I know there are companies on this call who are large organizations with a lot of resources, and there's some of you who are juggling a million things. What I want to say about the list that I just went through is many of these things are they're a one-time effort. And what I mean by that is spend the time to essentially build this out. And we can talk about essentially a checklist of things you need to have afterwards, but find the time to build this out. Then like you can reuse it. You might have to refine it, but overall, this is not something you have to do literally every single time you hire someone. So, but build that into your playbook, create your own playbook so that you understand, okay, this is what I'm working with. These are the strengths and weaknesses of my ability to like find people, and then go in the world with that forward. Because if you're not doing that, which is what most companies are doing today, you're basically posting a job on job boards like CareerBeacon, Indeed, your career site. It's the equivalent of you putting a sign on your window that says we're hiring and hoping that someone sees it. And I can tell you that this is not the way to do it in 2025. So with that said, when everyone is shouting we're hiring, what are you going to do to stand out? And we have a special guest today. Some of you know this individual, some of you have talked to this individual, but I wanted to bring someone to help me deliver this presentation, because I don't think there's anyone else on our team who can do this next phase better than Ryan. So Ryan, take over.
Thanks, Eve. I appreciate it. So just a heads up, or I guess a little introduction on myself. So I run product here at CareerBeacon. Before CareerBeacon, I had my own startup called Rootly. And before that, I had a product called Raise Your Flag, all in the talent acquisition space. Really was visual job postings. Raise Your Flag were careers for people without university or college. So I've been living and breathing this stuff for a very long time, specifically in talent acquisition, talent attraction, recruitment marketing, EVPs, all that fun stuff. But really, my goal is to make things a little bit less painful, a little bit more delightful, and a whole lot more inspirational for both sides of the marketplace. And when I'm not working on products and messing around in the digital space, you can probably find me out here where I live in Okinawa, Japan, having tea parties with my daughters or riding my motorcycle through the little narrow streets and sugarcane fields that we have all over our island here in Okinawa. So super stoked that I get to be a part of this session. It's something that I'm really excited about, and I can't wait to share some of our views on things with this group here. But before I do that, I do want to just go back in history a little bit. And I want to go back to the year 1940. And I want to share a story with everybody here about somebody named Hiro Onoda. And I don't expect you to know his name, but some of you may have heard the story before. And I just want to go through some of the quick points and then, of course, talk a little bit about it. It's 120 over here. It's all good. I live for this kind of stuff. So December 1944, this Japanese lieutenant, Hiro Onoda, he gets stationed in this small island in the Philippines. He gets selected as this part of this like guerrilla combat unit. And he's told, as he's being deployed to the Philippines, you are to stay on this island until the Imperial Army comes back and tells you to leave your post. And so he stays there, and they fight part of the war there. And the war ends about a year and a half later. So he was there in December, and then a year later and half a year later, it's August 1945, war's over. And so they drop these leaflets or these pamphlets from airplanes flying above the island to try to communicate with the Japanese soldiers who still might be on the island, saying, hey, the war is over, like it's time to come out. And Hiro's convinced that this is a tactic from the enemy trying to lure him out and to give up his position. He's like, no way, I'm staying right here. And then so search parties are deployed to try to find some of the soldiers that still might be out there. So they actually sent Japanese people to the islands to try to speak with the Japanese soldiers, to get them to reveal their hiding locations and to come out and to return to Japan. And so when they actually came near where Hiro was, he heard them speaking Japanese, saw that they were Japanese. He's like, no way. These are Japanese prisoners of war who are being forced against their will to try to get me out, and I'm not going to give up my position. So he doesn't give up his position. He's getting in fights with local police and local people. 8 years later, it's the Korean War, and he heard planes flying overhead, and Hiro is convinced this is the Japanese army the Japanese military on the offensive. So he's fully convinced that the war is still going on. Korean War ends. Now they drop newspapers from airplanes onto the island to say, hey, here are the headlines. This is the date. Here's what's going on. The war is over. Now, again, Hiro's convinced that these signs, these newspapers, these pamphlets, they are American propaganda. Then, 1970, 30 years later, there's a Japanese explorer named Norio Suzuki exploring Philippines, comes across Hiro and tries to convince Hiro, like, the war is over. Like, it's time for you to come back. And Hiro finally says, okay, if you can get my commanding officer to come here and tell me to abandon my post, I'll abandon my post and go back to Japan. Norio goes to Japan, hunts down or finds Hiro's original commanding officer, luckily still alive. Commanding officer goes to Philippines and commands Hiro to give up his post and to return to Japan. 30 years after being deployed to the Philippines, 15 years after being declared dead, Hiro returns to Japan. You might be hearing me tell this story and wondering, what does this have to do with talent acquisition? Or the other side of this, what does it have to do with job search? Because let's admit they kind of go hand in hand. I think for years, we've been hearing and seeing that things are changing. The signs are there. And while they might not be dropping from airplanes in the form of newspapers and leaflets, there are signs that are telling us that things have changed. The data is there. The trends are there. But so many of us are ignoring it, or are overwhelmed by it, or are scared of it, or just maybe haven't fully understood it. And at times it feels, metaphorically of course, that we're holding down an island waiting for help, but really struggling to try to interpret which signals are real and which ones we should be maybe pursuing as a result of where we are as an organization and what we should be pursuing. And so my goal over the next 10 minutes is to share some of the ways that we might be able to do that. But in order to do that, we need to understand that the signals are real, meaning when we hear people saying that things have changed, they have materially changed. The way that we find our ideal candidates, the way that we connect with our ideal candidates, the way that we hire them, the way that we onboard them, the way that we make offers, the way that we interview them, all of that has changed. And on the flip side, everything has changed for a job seeker. The way that they are trying to find work has drastically changed. Yes, there are still job boards. Yes, that's still the base unit of talent acquisition. But we have people on TikTok looking for work. We have people like Jay Beach, who, after finding himself unemployed, made some wonderful content on TikTok that over the course of 2 weeks got him a ton of interviews. And on the third week, he started his job. But it's not just something that's stuck to TikTok or stuck to these networks. We've got X, or formerly Twitter, people coaching people on how to find jobs on that platform, as well as employers trying to educate other employers on how to actually use these platforms to target their ideal candidates and to onboard them or to potentially attract them to join their organization. And now we have people who are in the talent acquisition space who are sharing their insights with others. People go on Reddit and say like, hey, have you ever tried recruiting on Reddit? And people responding like, yeah, we have, and it's been tremendously successful. And here's how it's worked out, or here's what I've been able to do as a result. And so the whole point of this is that these are the signals that are dropping, again, metaphorically, from the sky, landing in our hands, that things have materially changed in the market. And the one thing that I'd like to state right now that goes totally against the title of today's webinar is your next hire is not hidden, not at all. And if we want to go back to our hero example, or we want to go back to what I was just saying in the previous slide set, that we are playing by new rules, right? And Yves talked about this. He showed that little now hiring sign that at one point was big, but as you backed out, got a little bit smaller, a little bit smaller. The spray and pray approach is just done. It's not working on either side of this marketplace. And we're not saying, again, that job boards don't work. That's definitely part of the equation. We need to be out there publicly signaling that we're hiring. We need to hone in our messaging. We need to do things for SEO purposes. Of course, putting things on the job boards, absolutely critical and part of the strategy. But some of the things that I think are missing from the equation or the stack or the approach are understanding that we now live in a world where we get to speak directly to our next hire. And I'm not talking in metaphors here. I'm talking about the tools that exist that when we do find somebody that we want to engage with, we don't have to waste any time. We can connect with them directly on whatever platform we happen to uncover that applicant or that candidate. Yes, it might sometimes be through an ATS or email or LinkedIn outreach. But as we saw in the slides previous to this, other times we might be able to utilize TikTok, X, Quora, Reddit, the other platforms that exist where we know candidates might be hanging out. And it's not always limited to the virtual world. And I'll talk about some of the physical places in a couple minutes here. And one of the new rules that I don't think necessarily gets talked about enough, but I think you see where we're going with this, is that the need to understand where the candidate journey starts. I've been in this space long enough to know what talent acquisition has been limited to, right? Where a lot of the conversation is talent acquisition starts at the job posting, or talent acquisition starts on the career site. Talent acquisition is so much broader than that in terms of where the journey starts. And our job is to understand where that might start for our organization and make sure that those places, those interactions receive the same type of attention and support to help bring people into the funnel, again, which I'll talk about in a second here. The thing that I hear so often from employers as I'm going through this and going like, here's what we need to do, and here's how we can change talent acquisition, and here's where you need to start playing, and here's how you can change your approach with job postings, and here's what you can do on your career site. Here's how we can get analytics from your main site to your career site to really track conversion and look at our funnel as a whole. I get people stopping me and saying, but Ryan, like, the applicants are a problem here. And they go through all of the reasons why the applicants are a problem. I'm getting too many. I'm not getting enough. Ryan, the one I get a lot right now is that, like, Ryan, the applicants that we're getting, I know they're just spraying and praying, or I know they're using AI just to apply to a bunch of jobs, or they're not qualified enough. And then I say something usually to those employers with a smile on my face so that I don't get kicked out of the meeting that, sure, I understand the applicants might be a problem, but more often than not, our applicants are a direct reflection of our effort and who we are and how we're showing up as an organization. And then I show this slide so everyone laughs and takes the edge off of me being a little accusatory. But really, what I'm talking about here is the fact that our applicants are a direct reflection of our efforts. So if we're getting applicants that haven't taken the time to find out about our organization more before they applied, maybe the organization didn't take enough time to understand what the ideal candidate profile was, or where that ideal candidate profile might hang out, as Yves talked about just a couple of minutes ago. If your applicants are applying using generic resumes and cover letters, well, maybe the job postings are generic and not giving enough context so that the applicant knows whether or not they're a good fit. So they're hitting you with a generic one. And as much as we're using AI on the talent acquisition side, the job seekers are using AI on, and it's a little bit of a game of cat and mouse. And so I use this picture of course, in jest so that everyone can smile at this wonderful family in their beautiful Hawaiian shirts. I have no idea who these people are. To show that the candidate is a reflection of the employer. And so the way that we usually look at TA and recruitment is we talk about a hiring funnel. And it usually looks something like this, right? We say, okay, for this thing to work, for us to get our next hire, we need this number of job views. And we know that if we get this number of job views, we'll get this number of apply clicks based on the conversion rates that we've seen historically. We need that many apply clicks to get this many completed applications. We need that many completed applications to get this many interviews. We know we need that many interviews to give out this many offers. And then we know that based on that, we can actually make a hire. Now, I have a different approach on this, or a different approach to this, that yes, we need to track all of these things. Yes, for your organization, these numbers are real, and you must track them to get an understanding of how things are working from a quantitative standpoint. But I also have an argument that there's another way to look at this, and it's in the form of a pyramid. And so what I want to challenge everybody to do right now is to shift thinking just a little bit, even for just a brief moment in time, that when you are opening up a role in your organization, when you're heading out to try to fill that role with the ideal person for that job at that time, your job is not to necessarily fill a funnel. You are looking for a market of one. You have one open role and you need one person to fill that role. And your job is to do absolutely everything in your power to support that one person. It requires you to turn the funnel upside down and to view it as a pyramid a little bit, as we see here on the slide, with your ideal candidate perched at the top of that pyramid. And then below them are all of the things that you need to do to try to connect with and to support that ideal candidate, to understand if they're a fit or not for that role. And it starts with community involvement, and that's online and offline. So that means, are there online communities, as Yves has already talked about, where those ideal candidates might be hanging out, that they might be networking, that they might be trying to level up skills? What type of content and communication can you put out that tries to signal to those ideal candidates that you're there and that you're hiring, and this is the type of organization that you have, and these are the things that you offer as an employer? Then actually getting out and networking and trying to find referrals, because we know that that's how the world works. And that means virtual networking and getting out to actual physical events, because sometimes our ideal candidates are hanging out, yes, in the real world. Skill alignment, making sure that when we talk about our roles and responsibilities and what we have available at the moment, that it's clear for your ideal candidate to clearly identify where their skills align with what you're looking for. And I'll talk about this in just, I think, the next slide or two slides from now. Along with that skill alignment comes culture and value alignment, making sure that you are clear on, as Yves talked about, I think in the first probably 7 minutes of the presentation, where you're going as an organization, and use that as a strong signal to try to capture some of those ideal candidates into your sphere of interest. And then you actually engage with those people until you eventually get to that ideal candidate for that role. And while it's not a massive shift, I do believe that looking at the way that we're approaching our ideal candidates and recruitment in general as less or in conjunction with that funnel, that of course we do need to be measuring, but all of the efforts that we could be deploying to facilitate a connection to our ideal candidates. And the cool part about a lot of this is that, one, it's evergreen, meaning that you create it once, or you show up once, or you do that webinar, or you create that piece of content or that piece of communication, and it can live for as long as you want it to live. And the other part is that it snowballs. The more that you do this, the more that you're seen, the more that cache of content or contribution or community starts to build and puts you into a position of narrowing the gap between you and those ideal candidates. And so Yves has already started talking about this part in particular, but how do you actually find your market of one, right? So you've got a new position that you're hiring for tomorrow. how do you actually start talking to your market of one? Well, the very first thing is you do is you start with the best, meaning you reach into your organization. Actually, let's get a little bit more specific. Let's imagine that tomorrow you're about to open up a requisition for a new iOS developer. What I want you to do is I want you to reach into your organization or reach into your network, and I want you to find the best iOS developer that you can find. And I want you to find someone who's doing that job extremely well, that's really excited about that work. And then I want you to ask them questions about why they're doing that work, how they found that work, what their interview process was like, what they liked or what they didn't like about that interview process. What was their first day like? What things get them out of bed in the morning to do that work? And once you find out all of that information about that person who's doing that job and doing it really well, I want you to reverse engineer every effort of your recruitment efforts as if it was made specifically for them. And so when you're going to events, I want you to try to find somebody like that or that meets that profile. When you're online and you're seeing people who might be talking about their work or their portfolio or displaying their portfolio in that kind of way, really trying to find people that would do it in the way of that person that you've connected with in your organization or your network. And I think the best byproduct of this approach happens to be this. For a very long time, I, as Ryan, have been preaching about the need for job postings to get a full overhaul in the way that we approach them. And one of the ways that I champion or I really push for is to give as much context as possible. So if we know that we're working with a market of one, we know who we're trying to talk to. Well, now all of a sudden we can get really specific with the way that we talk. So what does that mean in practice? It means that when you're giving presentations at a local college or showing up at a job fair or writing your job posting, that no longer are you like, we need people with great communication skills, because that means nothing to people. We can tell people exactly how an iOS developer in your organization communicates, what's expected of them, who they'll be communicating with, how often they'll be communicating with those people, and what the outcomes of their communication is supposed to be. And we can then go through and start labeling all of the skills a little bit differently, and more importantly, giving them a level of context that we haven't been able to give in the past because we did a little bit of legwork at the beginning. This type of approach to communicating the possibilities of work for your organization within your company not only allows you to reach that ideal candidate in a more direct and effective way, it opens your funnel to a more diverse candidate pool. And I'll just take one little segue or one little sidestep here. When we say things like communication skills and we're trying to attract a diverse candidate pool, there's a subset of candidates that will see that and go through their brain of all the times where maybe their communication skills didn't add up or maybe made them feel a little bit self-conscious. You can imagine people, maybe it's a newcomer, maybe somebody with a disability, maybe somebody that doesn't have communication skills in a group setting. If we can be very specific about how communication skills will be used in a role, it's a lot easier for somebody to opt into that based on what they're capable of doing. Candidate interpretation is one of the biggest threats to our entire cycle. And so when we leave things up to candidates to interpret, so often they're going to get it wrong and either opt in when they're not qualified or opt out when they really are qualified and they could do that work if we could just communicate it in a clearer way. And I'm back to the main points now. So what does this mean for your organization in terms of after this has been deployed once? Yes, we talked about some of this being evergreen. Yes, we talked about this only needing to be done kind of one time or lots of it only being done one time. But the other part is that we need to approach this with the same way that we would if we were running sales or marketing campaigns or releasing product. I don't know where it happened, but TA somehow was reduced to only being measured for everything that happens from the career site onwards. But there's so many things that we can be doing within our sphere of influence to become better at talent acquisition, to, again, becoming a little bit more direct with that connection with our ideal candidates. A/B testing your messaging in job postings, at job fairs, in social ads, and any paid advertising that you're doing for those open roles. Testing new channels. You have nothing to lose by engaging with somebody on Reddit or engaging with somebody in the real world or finding a new platform where people might be displaying their portfolios online. Survey your recent hires on how the experience could be better, and then use that to then bake into the process the next time around to actually make it better and to communicate to job seekers what to expect as they're coming through. And then finally, celebrate the wins, right? You're going to get it right. You're going to get it right. And you need to celebrate when you do, learn from that, put it into your permanent process pile, iterate on the other stuff, and keep moving forward. And the interesting thing for me for all of this is that if this was sales or marketing, like nobody would bat an eye being like, here's all the stuff we need to do to support and land this one customer. We need to show up at these places. We need to spend a little bit of money here. We need hyper personalized communication and campaigns. But for some reason in TA, sometimes it's met with a little bit of friction. But we are trying to market to these candidates. We are trying to sell them on why our organization at this point in time and the places that we are going is the organization to join. And I'll leave you with this final point. How you show up as an organization matters. The first impression absolutely matters, and authenticity matters. And the thing that we don't get to control is where that candidate is going to have their first experience with us. And that's why it's so critical for us to be trying these different channels and making sure that we're honing our messaging and showing up in a way that we want to be showing up. And when you show up in a way that's not authentically you and your organization, people know and they can find out. And that's why it's so worth your time, effort, and energy to find out who you are as an organization, where you're trying to go, and who you're trying to bring with you. And I'll pass it back to Yves to continue.
Now, you guys know I was trying to rush through the first part to give Ryan the spotlight. Ryan, thanks so much for sharing that. And Ryan, I don't know any other storytellers better than you, so your kids must fall asleep pretty easily at night. Not because you're bad, because your stories are so great. So, is your organization ready? We talked about a lot of things. I know most of you are probably understaffed, under-resourced. You already have a million things on your plates. And so you're probably going like, how do I do this? Like, I just don't have the bandwidth. But the reality is, it just starts with one of these things at a time. There's a list here, but like the first thing it starts is with you. So like, I don't know how many conversations I have on a regular basis where someone will say, hey, we can't find anyone because our salaries aren't competitive. We don't have the same benefits. And my first question is like, well, why do you work there? And they'll go like, well, they trust me. They give me a lot of authority on decision making. It's a family-owned company. They value employees. Like, you're literally telling me everything that you should be communicating to the outside world. But instead, you're focusing on like, hey, we can't compete because we don't have the salary. That's going to be a challenge. There's no doubt about it. But there are things that you can do because there are some people out there who will care about those things. And so. But it really just starts with like, can you get flexibility and curiosity for yourself and for your organization around experimentation? Do you have an adequate application? I say adequate because that would be a better step towards most application process that exists today. So I'm not even going to ask for, do you have a great application process? Because most don't. Have you identified like where you could look for your individuals based on your ideal candidate profiles? Do you have a compelling message? Like, if you read your own job postings and you put yourself in the shoes of someone who's coming across these, like, would you yourself like want to work at that company? Because we are all visual, and more so today than past generations because of how much we are bombarded on a regular basis from literally everything. So I can guarantee you that everyone who's reading your job posting, as they're reading it, they're imagining themselves in your organization. And if they can't see themselves in your organization, then everything else you've done to get them to that point is going to be futile. So these are some of the things that you need to look at, but it really just starts with you. And what I also want to add is that most of these things that we talked about, many of these things don't have a cost associated other than time. And I know time is money, but we talked about Reddit. We talked about some of these like social channels that you can go and explore. They don't have a cost associated to them. So go post something, go see what happens. Like, there's just really a lot of, instead of like saying like, I don't have time, which is what most people say as a default reaction, but like say, well, what if I was able to carve maybe half an hour of my day to just experimentation and see what might work, or like see what you can create out of that. And then you'll see that it'll start to shift. And then you'll also be able to build a case, because you might actually need to get someone else from your organization to sign off on all these things that you want to do. But you need to try to figure out how to do it yourself first. But what I wanted to show you here is essentially that this can be done at all scales. Like, these are companies. So I'm going to start with like, massive budgets, big team, can definitely. But if you continue to go through these are generally entry-level positions that are being hired for at Chipotle in a lot of cases, or in terms of, because in the restaurant business, they will have challenges with salaries and things like that, but they are still investing and painting a picture of what it's like to work there. You have mid-sized organizations, but what you see, and then you have smaller organizations, and even other examples that we could have found that like businesses with 20 people who do an amazing job. Go on CareerBeacon today. Go on the bottom and go click on work with us and see like how we do. Essentially, we're a team of, many of you think we're in the hundreds. We're a team of about 12 people, not about. So go on CareerBeacon and see how we promote our values, because we also don't have a big team. We don't have a hiring department. We don't have a lot of the resources that many of you don't have either. So go see how we do it, and feel free to rob and duplicate. But start there. But there's consistency in how a lot of these companies are doing this. So I do want to make sure we have time for Q&A.
Okay, and with that, I think we're almost on time to wrap it up. Yves, Ryan, thank you for the insights. Thank you, everybody, for joining and sticking around. We will be sending the slides. We will be sending as well the recording of the webinar. And just a reminder that there's a feedback survey at the end to get your thoughts. We live for you, and these thoughts are super, super valuable for next sessions. Thank you very much.
Also, it's 2 a.m. for Ryan, so Ryan, go to bed.
Yep.